Hello again. I have an idea that, offered a choice, most Muslims in this country of Pakistani heritage would prefer to live in London boroughs such as Newham or Tower Hamlets, in preference to areas which contain no Muslims or very few. In the same way, many white British people prefer to live in streets or districts which are predominantly made up of other white British people. I doubt that I've said anything controversial here. It's simply the way of the world. It is why Golders Green in London is a Jewish district and the southern end of Green Lane in Haringey is full of Turkish Cypriots. Similar people cluster together. This is what happens in multicultural and multi-ethnic societies. Ideologues have this wonderful vision of black and white living happily side by side and Muslims having Jewish friends, Turks going for days out with Greeks and so on, a bit like those lovely illustrations which one sees in magazines produced by the Jehovah's Witnesses. This is one of the reasons that I moved to Essex from Tottenham, where I had been living for 7 years. The society in Tottenham had become so completely different in its customs from how I like to live my life that I no longer felt at ease there. I think that I need to talk about percentages again, as I did yesterday. I'm aware that some people are determined not to get to grips with this mathematical concept and will make heroic efforts to avoid learning about it, but this does have a great deal of bearing on our lives. I think that we can probably all agree that most people do not commit murder, nor do they take part in street robberies or discharge firearms in the streets, or break into other people's homes or deal in illegal drugs. Most black people do not do these things any more than most white people do, or most people of Chinese ancestry for that matter. All those crimes are definitely minority interests. However, if a large enough minority engage in such activities, it can make a neighbourhood undesirable. As I said yesterday, it doesn't matter why some people behave in dangerous or antisocial ways, whether it is the fault of society, poverty and racism, say, or if it is something deeper than that, an inherited tendency. The fact remains that some people carry on in what we might call socially unacceptable ways. Some things that are more common in some ethnicities than others are burglary and football hooliganism, which tend chiefly to be the pursuit of young white working class men. There are other things, homicides for instance, which are far more common among black people. Black people are 6 times more likely to be victims of homicide in London and also 6 times more likely to be the perpetrators. There are also things which are not lethal but very annoying. Loud music, throwing cigarette ends out of the window and into the street, spitting in the street, dropping litter, vandalism. I'm not suggesting that all these things are commoner among black people than white. I'm speaking generally. I'm talking here of behaviour which can make a district undesirable. White British people have their own code of what is acceptable behaviour in the street, on buses, in communal areas of blocks of flats and so on. Very often, those from other cultures have different standards and this causes friction. If the percentage of certain people carrying out undesirable activities, whether it's homicide or spitting in the street or parking in an inconsiderate way, if the percentage goes up too high, it can make an area seem menacing or no longer relaxing or pleasant to live in. For this reason, you get the so-called white flight from inner cities to green suburbs. People wish to live with their own kind, rather than be constantly irritated by what they find annoying or consider to be antisocial behaviour. In this way, ghettos form. That is why only 15% of the people in the London borough of Newham are white British, whereas when I was a child it was 100%. I used to have a lot of cousins down East Ham way. The result is that cities in Britain are divided up along racial and religious lines, and this is a natural consequence of immigration. It does not bode well for the future because whenever you see that kind of thing in the past, it always ends in bloodshed. Cyprus used to be like that, with 20% of the people in towns being Turkish Muslims and the majority of the population being Greek Christian. We all know how that ended. The British dream of a multicultural society where all different colours and religions, nationalities and so on would all live happily side by side has failed. What has instead happened is that our cities have become so fragmented that they are now divided into separate domains, where those from one district hate and fear those living a few hundred yards away. This manifests itself in regular murders when a person from one neighbourhood ventures into somebody else's perceived territory. I'm sure we all know about the so-called postcode wars and murders of gang members from one estate who have been seen out of their district. It is why a black person from South Tottenham walking through the Orthodox Jewish area of Stamford Hill will be stared at and treated as an enemy intruder. It is why a white person walking through parts of Newham knows that he is unwelcome there. This is somebody else's territory. There's no sign that this state of affairs is improving, and every sign that it's getting worse. We looked at what was happening in Cyprus and other places, but instead of determining that we would not have such a situation in our own country ever, we actually set out to do so, and thus lay the grounds for a low-level civil war in the future, perhaps.